Hi, friends. Welcome back to another week of the Recover Your Life podcast. My name is Bridgett, and I'll be your host. Together, we're building a community of men and women who know what it means to grieve well, rest well, and love well to live the life we dream of. Before we jump into today's episode, I wanted to let you know that it's going to be a little bit of a different flavor because I am the guest today, and I'm so excited. Hosting today's conversation is none other than my friend Ashley Key. Ashley is the host of the 700 Club and the 700 Club Interactive for the Christian Broadcasting Network, or CBN, in Virginia Beach, Virginia. She loves spending time with her loved ones, her dog Cody, and is passionate about spreading the message of the gospel to the world around her. You get to hear our story of how we met, and then she asked me some pretty incredible questions about my story and how the heck we got here to you listening to a podcast with me on it. I'm so excited. Could not have thought of another friend that I wanted to host this conversation. My hope is that you get to see a little bit more behind the scenes about who I am. You get to hear our hope and desire for 2024 for the Recover Life community, some fun things we have coming up this year, and the heart that I will be committed to carrying as we continue to journey together. Let's dive in.
All right. Hello, Bridgett. How are you?
I'm so good. Thanks for being here, Ashley.
Oh my gosh. I'm very excited to be with you. Hello, all the viewers and listeners of Recover Your Life podcast. Very honored to be here today. And I'm honored to, be the one hosting and asking you the questions, Bridgett. I'm excited for this.
I'm so excited. And I have no preparation of what you're asking, which is always my favorite.
Right.
So I cannot wait.
Yes.
I trust you. So I'm excited to see where we go.
Okay. I'm so excited. Well, first, let's let the people know how me and you met. Like, how did we get connected? Let the people know.
I slid into your DMs. It was
She really
Instagram.
did. She really did.
We met at the Kerygma Summit, which is a conference for female teachers, leaders in the church that's led by Lisa Harper. 2 springs, not this past spring, the spring before.
Yeah, 2022.
Wow, time all kind of blurs together.
I know.
And I think you had posted asking about, does anyone know any good coffee shops in Franklin?
Did I really? Is that how it was?
I think that's what it was.
Oh
it was
my gosh.
And I was like, hey, are you going to the Kerygma Summit by any chance? Oh, actually, I think backing up further, I had attended your, I feel bad I forget the name of it. You did like an online dating challenge.
Yes,
thing.
Unhooked. Yes.
In what year?
Oh my gosh. I think that came out in early 2020.
Okay. So yeah, that's how I first connected.
But that's when
it
came out. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Wow.
And then
that is insane.
We connected, and I just remember we went to lunch, and I was like, hey, I promise I'm not an Instagram stalker. I was like, I know nothing about you except this one thing. Because it always is weird. I mean, I've met so many people this year, like Courtney and other friends, where I meet them online, and then you just don't know if people are going to be psycho or not. So I'm glad that we've stayed friends.
I know, me too. Honestly, it was really cool that you had reached out because, I was going into Nashville. I don't know anyone in that area. I literally was going by myself. And so it was nice to connect with somebody and go to lunch with somebody and sit with somebody. Yeah. So that was really cool. And then, we've just stayed friends. And though we haven't seen each other in person since then, we've, we still connect via FaceTime and everything. So love that. I love our story of how we met.
I was telling a new friend today about our friendship. She was asking like, well, how do you know Ashley? And I was like, well, it's going to be really interesting to see Ashley in a formal setting because typically we're like no makeup in our sweatpants.
Oh my gosh.
Here's all my deep heart secrets. Will you help me? Like, we're both like, here's everything that's really painful and confusing in my life. Let's grow together. And so I'm like, oh, this is fun. We're going to have makeup on today. It'll be good.
No, literally, y'all. Like, I show up with zero makeup. I look a hot mess most of the time. And exactly what Bridgett said. I am divulging like the deepest things that are concerning me. Like, anyways, but I will say you are definitely somebody in my life who I can do that with. And I know will just be a listening ear and also provide a lot of wisdom and compassion, which I absolutely love about you. And so I'm very thankful for you and excited to have viewers and listeners get to know you a little bit better and your backstory. Like,
Yeah.
why Recover Your Life podcast? Why is grieving well? Why are you so passionate about that and all those things? Which brings me to my next question. I would love for you to just talk about how you grew up. Like, where did you grow up? How did you grow up? Did you grow up in a Christian home? Like, when did your faith become your own? All of those things.
Yeah, that's great. I grew up in a small town in upstate New York, graduated high school with 28 kids in my high school graduating class.
Wow.
So when I say it was tiny, it was tiny. And probably in middle, I had some exposure to faith growing up. Had a little bit of experience with the Catholic Church. And then when my mom got remarried to my stepdad, we ended up going to, like, us kids started going to Sunday school. And so kind of had some just formative, like, Christmas pageants and little, like, the typical Bible stories, that kind of stuff, and just really loving, kind people. And then in middle school, we got connected to a church that felt really different. I was like, oh, these people like actually know the Bible, like they for real about this, which was super helpful. And so started going to what we called teen club. It was youth group. I didn't even know what, like, youth group is like such a normal phrase, but that was not what we called it. So like I got to college, like, what is a youth group? I don't even know what that is.
Oh, wow.
And so one of my neighbors, her mom was a leader. And so she would pick me up every Saturday night and take me. And it just kind of began like a curiosity of what I've been exposed to faith for a long time, but this actually feels like a relationship with Jesus, and the Bible actually feels accessible to me as a teenager. So this is different. And so I just had wonderful mentors and teachers and really got connected to that church. I got saved on my bathroom floor at 13.
That's awesome.
I just had an encounter with God, and I was like, hey, I'm not really sure anything about this whole Christian thing, but like, I'm all in. And like, I would go to summer camps and they'd be like, do you want to rededicate your life to God? And I was like, no, when I said yes, I meant yes. Like, I'm not taking this thing back. Like, I'm doing this.
Yes. Yeah.
And so my plans were to go to Bible college and marry a youth pastor and, have babies by the time I was 19. And I'm very grateful that that was not my story.
19. Whoa.
I just was like, okay, great. We're going to that's what I saw modeled as kind of like the success of to be a Christian woman. This is what it means. I was in a faith setting that did not support women in leadership unless they were teaching women. And so I was like, okay, this is cool, but like, I'm not really your tea party kind of girl. Kids are great, but not really. That's not my place either. I love being with adults. I love being in rooms with men and women. I love growing and discipling together, but I guess there's not really a place for me. So my plans changed, and I ended up going to a Christian college down by New York City. And it really opened my mind to just a lot of different faith expressions that I was not used to. And so I saw a lot of women pastoring and leading. I got introduced to a friendship with the Holy Spirit, and I saw a lot of signs and wonders and miracles, but also a really deep connection to mental health and trauma-informed discipleship and like a holistic health, that it wasn't just like, I always like to say, like, it's miracles and mental health. It's both.
Wow.
So I kind of thought that was the only way. Then graduated from college and got a job pastoring, started out as a young adult pastor. And then that kind of got confusing for my congregation because I've always loved teaching adults, and I've loved having men and women in a room. So I love being in a room when I've got like a 14-year-old girl and an 80-year-old man, and we're all learning together.
Yeah.
And so I was like, hey, I'm not quite sure that this is the perfect spot for me. Can we shift a little bit? And I did. So I was a spiritual formation pastor. Again, all of those same things: signs, wonders, miracles, mental health, trauma, inner healing, emotional health, therapy. How do we blend all those things together? Love to preach. Got connected with a really great, it's called Preacher's School from California, with a really great team there who really helped me navigate what does it look like to teach with integrity and honor. And so super thankful about that. And then I would say probably for a decade, I've carried I didn't know it was called Recover Your Life, but I've carried the dream for Recover Your Life. And what would it look like to me actually birth something that
Yeah.
took all of that experience, all of my story and the stories that I've held with others in my life, and say, what if we made an online space? What if we made a podcast? What if we created coaching opportunities to actually be with
Yeah.
people? Because that was a hard part for me. It was when I was pastoring at a specific location, my capacity for helping people was limited to that city. And so
Mm-hmm.
now that I'm able to do the virtual coaching, I'm able to meet with people from all over, which is really cool. So we are creating communities of men and women who grieve well, rest well, and love well from all over the
Yeah.
world. And that is really fun to me.
That is absolutely amazing. See, I think some people might not know all of that about you. And that's what I love about you. You're so multifaceted, and you truly, like, she knows what she's talking about, y'all. Like, seriously, not just because you've done the work, but you actually have the experience as well to back up all of these things that you're talking about on the podcast and things that you're really being an advocate for. What, like, how would you describe, because you were in Ohio, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how would you describe that season of your life? Because obviously you're in Nashville now. You made a big move, which you've mentioned on the podcast before. But what was that season like for you?
Yeah. Kind is the first word that
Mm,
comes to mind. It was such a kind season. Um, from the day I got hired, it was always with the understanding that it would be my launching as well.
wow.
And
Mm-hmm.
so because I've carried this dream for a long time, I've really wanted to steward that well. And so I wanted to make sure um, that I was honest with the vision that I've carried, is that
Yeah.
this would be something that would be bigger than just one city, one location. And so, but
Mm-hmm.
I needed to grow. I mean, I still have lots of years ahead of me of growing. I've by no chance like arrived at some level of perfect leadership. But I'm really grateful that I had like 5 years of hiddenness to really kind of practice some of these
Wow.
skills.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say it was like a really kind launching. It had some really beautiful, sweet moments. It also had a lot of pain for me personally. I walked through one of the most devastating, disorienting seasons of my whole life in my own personal story. I had already kind of had a theology of grief before that. People have, if they've listened to the podcast, they can go back. We did a 2-part episode with one of my college professors, Dr. Wanda Walborn, who was one of the people that have introduced this whole conviction of grieving well to me. So I had
Mm-hmm.
an idea of it. I had a spiritual discipline of grief. But when you have a dream that's destroyed, it
Mm.
will push some of those things. I was even thinking about it on my walk this morning. I think Christine Kane talks about this too, like the scripture of the like, all that is shaken will be shaken, right?
Wow.
So
Mm.
that which remains will remain. And so I just feel like there was that moment of everything got shaken to the core. And I was able to walk through that with a really loving community of support locally in Ohio
Mm-hmm.
and from the networks of people that I've built around the country to just really walk
Yeah.
with me through that and come out on the other side. I would say I feel like maybe in the last 6 months, I feel like the brain fog of the cost of that season has kind of lifted. And my body's
Wow.
has carried the cost of that devastation for a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm starting to see my nervous system come back. I'm starting to see, I've just been praying to the Lord. I was like, hey, like I feel even in the spiritual space, there's like I've lost some innocence. Would you restore that? And I've seen the Lord so kindly just create a lot of
Mm.
space in faith-based spaces or in the church setting that have been really kind and nurturing to me in places where I felt a lot of pain. And so that was kind of what was weaving through the story as I was transitioning here to Nashville.
Yeah, absolutely. What was there, like, a moment when you personally realized, or maybe not even a moment, but a season or something to where you realized you needed to recover your life?
100%. Yeah. August of 2021, I found myself on the end of a phone call conversation that changed the trajectory of my life in a way that I had planned it to go, a way that I wanted it to go, in a way that I had dreamed of it going for a really long time. And I just remember like feeling that there was that deep innocent part of Bridgett that ran away. Like I physically felt her run away and hide. And I go, okay, I don't know if I'm ever going to get her back again. Like I don't have any proof that she's ever going to come back to life. There's a part of me that's died. Because when dreams die, there is a part of us that dies with them. And so I would show up to church and I'd be really angry. And I'm trying to figure out how to pastor through this too, because I want to be super honest and authentic. I preached on grief a month after I went through this. I'm so glad I did. I did process that with my leadership just to make sure that that was still, I called a local trauma therapist in town and I was like, hey, can you just check me? Like, I'm super not okay right now. Can you kind of help me create some safe boundaries that are going to protect me and protect my congregation as I'm walking through a really deep season of pain? And so I pulled back a ton. I had a podcast that I was part of in that season. I stopped doing that. I stopped my workshops, my teaching. I kept, I kept a baseline of my responsibilities because I wanted to be obviously have integrity in my employment. I kept preaching. I'm like, please don't take preaching away. I was like, it's the thing where I feel the most alive. But I couldn't stand that sermon. I was like, I can either preach this sermon and sit down, or I'll stand up and I can't talk. So you have to kind of pick what we're going to do. It's the only sermon I've preached sitting down. My favorite sermon I've ever preached. It cost me the most.
Wow.
But yeah, I would sit and I would weep and I would go to worship and I'd be like, this is all really stupid and I really don't even want to sing this. And sometimes I wouldn't. It's like, yeah, I can't. That's not an honest offering that I can give. And then there were other times where I'm like, okay, as you get really honest in grief, it creates tons of space for celebration, which is a really cool part. People are always afraid of like, well, if I really acknowledge all of the pain that I'm experiencing or all the pain that I'm experiencing because of the choices of another human, or the pain that I've contributed to in my own story, right? In most settings, you're going to have stuff that's out of your control, stuff that another person contributed to, and then, cycles that you've contributed to in your own trauma story. So they're all there and you get to be compassionate to everybody. But first it's going to start with a whole heck of a lot of anger. So much anger, so much disappointment, so much sadness. And it was really scary for me because the physical manifestations of that were like, I lost chunks of my memory, where whole chunks of memory went black. I had severe anxiety, panic attacks and nocturnal panic attacks. So like I would go to bed at night and I'd wake up in the middle of the night for months and months. My skin itched uncontrollably. I had TMJ, like all these crazy weird symptoms. And I had friends that I was accountable to that was like, you need to sleep, you need to eat, and you need to go to work. And probably taking a shower would be really kind to your friends too, right? It was like, that's all we're trying to do right now is eat, sleep, work, take a shower.
Yeah.
And rest, obviously. And so my world got really quiet and really deep. And with that, my pain got really loud. And so I remember probably like 9 months into it, it was another preaching morning. And this is like such a funny detail, but it's like super significant. I'm going to tell on pastors for a second. Typically, some pastors can do it completely by memory. There's your notes on the wall or a back screen. So what looks like them doing it from memory is actually they're reading off of a wall in the back. I always love to check. So,
what? I did not know that.
You can start checking on your preachers and like see they usually have a hidden screen
I definitely
somewhere.
will.
And so I just was like, okay, great. I have fear because I was doing some sort of like spoken wordy type vibe to a sermon that I had never done that before. And so I had my cell phone and I was like, if it goes down for any reason, I want to make sure I still have notes. And I had this silly moment with the Lord and I was like, Lord, does this mean I don't trust you if I carry my cell phone in my pocket? And he goes, no, like whatever you need to feel safe is okay. And it was just that kind thing with the Lord of like, when you've experienced trauma, you might show up with needs that don't quite match the trigger, right? Like your response to a trigger might be really big. But it was one of those things where I felt the Lord's kindness. I'm like, I'm going at your pace. Like we're healing at your pace. I'm not going to force you to trust me. I'm not going to force you to get back in the game. I'm not going to force you to sing worship songs. I'm not going to force you to preach sermons. Like, we're going to go at your pace. And the days that you have to say no, I'm going to honor your no. And I felt Bridgett come back to life after 9 months, which is funny, even thinking about 9 months, right? That's typically how long it takes to birth a new
Wow.
life.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's cool.
I was like, okay, she's back now. But it came from, and I would say it out loud, I was like, Bridgett's died. And I don't know if she's coming back. Because I don't. I don't know. And then it formed into like, but I'm hopeful that she will. I'm hopeful that she will. And it does come from Matthew. Like, the reason why we call it Recover Your Life is in Matthew 11:28 in the Message translation. It says, are you weary? Are you worn out? Weary, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm like super burned out. I'm like super burned out on all this. And it didn't turn out like I wanted it to. And I followed all the Christian rules perfectly. I followed everything to a T. And it's not fair. And so I'm going to hold you to the fact that you said you're going to recover my life if I get away with you. And I did. I shut down my life. I've shut down so many things that are important to me. I've shut them down. I've gotten really small and quiet. And you need to show up now. And it was like that level of tone. Like, I was not trying to be like, Lord, if you, I was like, nah, bro, you're showing up here,
bro.
You got to show up here now.
I love it.
That's all I got. That's all I got.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And I mean, I've heard people talk about this too. It's like, look to David in the Psalms. He laments well. He's straight up honest with God. Like, I mean, he's maybe doesn't call God bro, but he's pretty honest with the way he feels.
The Hebrew version.
Yeah, exactly. What are some of the things that, maybe some practical things that you have done in your life that has helped you recover your life? I mean, if anyone knows you, we know that you are a connection coder. And was that something that God, like, how did you even find out about the connection codes? Like, talk about that, and if that was something that has really helped you.
Connection codes is a significant part of my story. Marriage and family therapist and clinical sexologist Dr. Glenn Hill and his wife Phyllis Hill have founded the Connection Codes, which is the guide to human connection. And so I had done, as a pastor, I had done tons of work in my own story. I had done EMDR. I had been to therapy. I had done inner healing stuff. I had done sozo stuff. Like, I had done freedom prayer. Like, I have done all the things, and I had been certified in a lot of things, which they're all great and wonderful. And I think that in certain seasons, they all hold helpful tools that can be beneficial. Yeah. I think the thing about it is that there is that caveat that it works for certain people in certain seasons. Or with connection codes, I really do believe it is every person needs the opportunity to know how to process their own emotions that they're experiencing, to share them with another person, and then have the opportunity to learn how to regard the experience of another human, even if it's not your experience. Right?
Wow.
So
yeah.
Let's say, you and I go get coffee and I get a lavender latte, and it is like a joy experience. I'm like, this is the best coffee I've ever had in my whole life. And you're like, okay, this is not super great. Right? Yeah. And you're like, oh my gosh, I love, right? In the South, they say that. I love that for you. I think it's so sweet. Oh, I love that for you. But also you can go, it's super painful for me. Or like I didn't love it. That's like a silly example of a cup of coffee, but like, we experience things like that all the time. Like, and so I found the book on a coworker's desk and was like, this looks interesting. The Guide to Human Connection. I love that.
Love that for yourself.
Thank you. I do. I took it home. I wrote notes in it. And I was like, ooh, I feel some guilt that I wrote in your book. I bought you a new copy. Here's the new copy. I'm keeping yours. Hope you're okay with that. And they were great. Just so you know, I don't write in everybody's books. I was a really good friend. And so I trusted that I could replace the book. Nice. And so that was kind of part of my transition here too. But it was this space of, in the Christian space, we're super allergic to guilt and shame. Of like, God doesn't speak in guilt and shame. The Lord's going to redeem you out of guilt and shame. And I do think that there is a difference between experiencing shame and learning from it. I love to say shame tells us who we are and who we're not.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
but it's like what happens when you it's the unprocessed shame that's the problem. It's the unprocessed shame that can, cause, your own inner turmoil, or, it can cause issues. So an example of that would be, even this week when we super vulnerable, as we're recording this today, we're getting closer to Christmas, which means I have had me some Christmas treats and some birthday treats and some treats. And my jeans are feeling a little bit snug. Okay. My jeans are feeling a little bit snug, and I've got my snug jeans that I have kind of put on the shelf, and I've pulled out my more spacious jeans. And so I do experience
Yeah.
some shame with that. So how do I process it? I go, ooh, I feel a little bit of shame. I know that I've gained some weight.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not spiraling into self-hatred. So how I'm doing that is I'm texting friends saying, hey, I have so much joy for the places and spaces that I have said yes to fun, yummy, homemade treats.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I want to be someone who honors sugar intake because I know it's good for my organs. I know it's good for my body. I know that it helps my immune system be strong. I feel better in my clothes. Like, all of that's true.
Mm.
And so, right, that shame is telling me who I am and who I'm not. But
Yeah,
because
that's
I've
good.
processed it, I'm able to share that and go, okay, I'm going to be connecting. I'm going to be kind. When I don't process shame, then it spirals in my head. You're fat. You're ugly. Nobody's going to want to marry you. You're awful for doing this. If you were really a good person, you have to work 4 hours a day on the treadmill, and you only can eat salad. Like, that's where it goes. But it's actually not the shame that's the problem. It's that your nervous system is trying to close a loop, or right, it's your nervous system that's trying to close a loop. It's your trauma history repeating negative patterns. It can be some
Mm.
spiritual warfare part of, like, that part of it. There's, right, we are body, soul, and spirit beings, so it's all at
Yeah.
play. But one of the things that has helped me through connection codes is saying, like, no emotion is bad. I can experience hurt. I can
Mm.
experience loneliness. I can experience joy. All of the things. And instead of me, like, trying to run away from it, and then I end up creating a life of self-sabotage, right? I'm actually connecting to it. And now I'm creating a life that's super connected to God, self, and others because of that.
Mm. Wow. I love that. No emotion is bad. I mean, how many times have we been told that? Some are, right? Especially in the
Mm-hmm.
Christian world. So that's super powerful. You have a quote on your Instagram, and you actually just posted it recently on the Recover Your Life podcast Instagram. You said, your
Okay.
need for salvation was never about the removal of your humanity.
Mm-hmm.
It has always been about our reconnection to it. Can you talk about that, and what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I get tears in my eyes even that you bring it up.
Mm.
Um, we've talked a lot about on here that self-trust is a hill I'm willing to die on.
Mm.
I think that if you've experienced any sort of pain in your life, especially if you've experienced hurt within a church system, or the painful consequences of a church leader violating decisions, is really painful. But it makes sense to me, right? That's a really great question that therapists will kind of have taught me, is like, hey, if you're noticing a behavior that doesn't make sense, ask, well, what would make this behavior make sense, right? So an example of
Mm.
that would be if I walk into a room and scream, and you're like, what? This is kind of weird. But if I walk into the room and let's say there's a person standing outside the window with, like, a dark hoodie and a gun, well, that makes
Mm-hmm.
that behavior make sense, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe I've had an experience with someone robbing my house years ago, and so I walk in and see a shadow, and my brain thinks it's the past traumatic event, right? So it's kind of be those types of things.
Mm.
So much of the way that we were taught about the gospel was the not well translated explanation of the flesh. Because I 100% believe that Jesus is the Savior, and that God, right, cannot be in the presence of sin. And so that's why we have Jesus, who came, who died, who lived a perfect life, who died on the cross, who not rode again. Maybe he rode again, but
Hey, he will.
he rose again, right,
Yeah.
for our reconnection. But the whole absurdity of the gospel is that God became flesh. He became human. And so the whole rescue mission was not to make us spirit beings, but it was to make us spirit-filled human beings. That's always
Wow.
been the plan.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I can trust that God's good plan for me is a reconnection to what it means to be a fully embodied human, I trust myself. And then in turn, I make decisions that honor love. I honor love with God, I honor love with others, and I honor love with myself, which is so much easier than being terrified of being evil all the time and constantly living in the, oh my gosh, like, what if I sin again? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Sinning is gross. Like, I hate the feeling of, and sin is when we miss the mark, right?
Yeah.
You feel it in your body where you go, ooh, I want to hide now. I don't feel good. I need to tell somebody about this. This feels yucky.
Absolutely.
Blah. Like, and so it's not me going like, oh, I'm so sorry, God, I won't ever do this again. It's having that compassion to say, hey, God, I just made some choices that dishonored the full expression of what it means to be human. I actually dehumanized my experience by violating
Wow.
love. I don't really understand that, right? Because there's a whole bunch of things that are involved in that. Everybody's story is different. So there's compassion. But I found that when I try to reconnect into what does it mean to be human, right? It means first that we are made in the image of God, that we're made for connection, that we have body, soul, and spirit needs that have the right to be met. And that, we were made for love and by love. When we've translated flesh as human and not flesh as sinfulness, we then say, well, I'm bad.
Wow.
Instead of, hey, maybe I've made some bad choices that have violated love. And we can get to healing. I always kind of say, it's always a silly picture that I give. But I think about the difference between condemnation and conviction, right? So condemnation is a picture of God showing up with his finger wagging, being like, Ashley, you are supposed to be a Christian. You are terrible. You are not following the rules. You're kicked out of my club, right? And conviction is that little bit you shimmy in your seat of like, ooh, gosh, this probably wasn't the best choice. This is not who I want to be, right? Shame's telling you who you are and who you're not.
Yeah.
And then Jesus comes and sits down on a nice summer day on a bench next to you with a beautiful ice cream cone. He says, hey, babe, what's happening? Like, that's not who we are.
Wow.
And you go, ooh, yeah, I missed it. Like, I want to be like you and I want to be like who you've asked me to be. But there's parts of this that feel really scary and really overwhelming. And I feel like I don't know another way to do it. And he goes, I know. Like, I'd love to teach you, though. I'd love to be friends with you. I'd love to heal with you at your pace. Like, I have a piece of artwork from my friend Krista Perotti, who's been on the podcast too. And it says, I will sit with you until you feel safe.
Wow.
And that is the gospel of, yes, I want us to live holy lives. I want us to repent when we need to repent, which means turn around and go in a different direction. But not just for the sake of it, but for Jesus' full reward of the gospel is that we would be returned to the self that he created in the garden. That we're actually restored to the goodness that his intention was. We're not just like, it's not like a video game. I don't really play video games, but it's not like you just go back to where you died, right? It's not like you just go back to the fall. It's like, oh, well, you only get here. It's like, no, we actually have access right? And it's that weird part of the God math that I don't understand, the already not yet of like, yes, we're living in some capacity of access to the kingdom of God and his presence and his fullness, but yet we're not in heaven yet. He hasn't returned yet. And so we're not in the full, like we're in the lowercase full, not the capital F full. And so it's just that weird God math that I don't quite understand, but it just takes the pressure off of like, which is different than, well, I'm just a human. I just make mistakes. I'm just not going to grow. Well, no, I'm just sinful. It's like, actually, God's restoration plan was to restore me to his design, and how that radically will change our life.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Mic drop with everything you just said, girl. Definitely I got a little teary-eyed just listening to you, because it's just such a reminder of the kindness of God. He's just so kind. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. And I think what you're doing with this podcast, it's helping people realize that, and so many other things. So what is like one practical piece of advice that you would give to viewers and listeners on recovering their life well?
You can't do it by yourself. I love
that
Jason Ballatin. Jason Ballatin is a pastor and coach, does a lot with like men's discipleship, which is really great, but I really love his content. And he's like, if you could have done it by yourself, you would have already done it by now.
Wow. Yeah.
And on the other side of that is we were made for community and partnership. Like that's how God functions. And so how we think that we're supposed to function as soul beings and not communal beings, I'm not quite sure. Yeah. Again, I think that's probably that whole like not having self-trust thing. But you can't do it alone. And so getting connected to places and spaces that are going to have like the awareness of the presence and kingdom of God and merged with trauma-informed discipleship, right? So it's you're getting help on a body, soul, and spirit level. I've broken those up, right? So I may have worked with someone in the body work space that's going to help me deal with some of like the PTSD stuff in my own story. I've worked with people who have a really beautiful history in the prophetic, in miracles and things like that, where I go, this feels really scary and terrifying to me right now. I have questions, but will you hold this for me? Will you grieve this with me? Will you help hear God? Will you listen to God for me and with me? And then I'm going to have like that soul-based space where I'm going to have therapy and coaches. I'm not going to say like, oh, you must do this, because I think it's different, right? And I've done lots of different tools and leaders and different voices in different seasons. But number one, don't do it alone. And honesty is always the most honoring thing.
Wow. Yeah.
It's really hard. Honor is really messy. But being honest about your experience of a person, a place, a church, an institution, a relationship, does not negate that there are also really wonderful qualities about the places and spaces where you are wounded, right? We're so often, especially when we talk about like family of origin trauma, I have a lot of people that are like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm dishonoring my parents. It's like, actually, you're honoring your parents, because you're bringing to light and saying, hey, I don't want to keep functioning like this. I love you. I honor you. And those are different for different people, right? Some people have family systems where they grew up where there was a lot of language around emotional intelligence, emotional health. Some people it was new, and so now they've got children in their 20s to 40s that are now learning this. That now they're going to their older family members who are saying, "Hey, like, what would it look like for us to engage in emotional health conversations now?" But I would say that first of all, you cannot do it by yourself, and get honest. And get honest with people that can hold both, right? Because if you get honest with people that can't hold both, you start gossiping.
Wow.
There's a difference between grieving and gossiping. right? Grieving well is saying, hey, I'm going to name all of the places where I experience pain with this person, place, or thing. Gossip is, let me tell you all the terrible things that they are,
Mm.
without any desire for restoration, where like the hope of grief is restoration.
Yeah.
And so that's, you just be careful. Like, and if you might need to change some friend groups or change some dynamics to make that possible. I love walking
Mm-hmm.
with people through that. That's a lot of the coaching 101 space that I'm holding is, what does it look like to kind of connect with someone outside of the community that's not bias to the
Yeah.
experience, that can kind of hold both, that can hold honor, that can hold grief, that can kind of help you unravel some of the trauma narrative in that and move forward in a way that's super real and honest about the pain, but also holds a lot of honor for the people that have caused harm.
Mm. So don't do it alone
Mm-hmm.
and be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Amen. I love that. Okay, Bridgett, last question.
Mm-hmm.
What are your hopes for the podcast in 2024? What do you want viewers and listeners to know, to walk away with, anything? What are you looking forward to in 2024 with
Yeah, I
this?
love that. I'm just excited to have like a full year. We started on August 1st. And so going into an actual new calendar year, to have a year to grow together, I'm super
Mm-hmm.
excited. I've been so grateful um, for the friends that I've been able to have conversations with, the authors and leaders that have been super impactful in my own healing journey, to actually be able to sit with them and to tell them
Yeah.
thank you, and to share those conversations with people that are listening.
Yeah.
I mean it when I say that I want it to be a community. And I've said this from our first family meeting that we had. Like, I refuse to build this by myself. So like,
Wow.
I'm not gonna like try to work super hard to just produce a bunch of content and like make money. And like, I'm not interested in that. I need help. I need people that are like, hey, like, come join us, come hang out with the podcast, or share it in their group text, or share it with their friends, or share it on their story, or engage. Like, that's really, really helpful. Like, so much identity for me, and for the guests that I have on when you're engaging in content. A like is helpful, but to actually be able to show up and comment and say, this is what was helpful to me. I love that when
Mm.
you see what other people are posting, to be able to actually care for them and to say, hey, I saw
Yeah.
that, Mark commented on this podcast about a grief that him and his family are going through. I'm going to pray for him. Um, I want it to be that space. Um, I'm super excited to, I think, kind of narrow in on this season that a lot of people that I'm talking to, and myself included, are finding in our faith journey. Is we've had some incredible history with God. We've experienced incredible amounts of pain. Um, and we're trying to figure out, what does it mean to have a reformation of our faith, to have a reconstruction of our faith that
Mm.
is honoring scriptural integrity, that's honoring what we know of mental health, um, and like is authentic. I think it was always such a weird thing to me, but I had a college professor say like one time, like, you are going to decide like how you express your relationship with God. That's why there's a lot of denominations, right? But I think about that in any relationship that you have. Everybody's relationship dynamics are different. It's like, you
Mm-hmm.
might show up at church and you're reading a liturgy prayer with candles, and it's somber and it's soft, and everyone shows up in a suit and a dress. Great.
Mm-hmm.
You might show up in your skinny jeans with your, almond milk latte, and you are should have bought a Hondaing with your tambourine. Love it. Love it. Okay. But you are choosing how you're going to navigate that relationship. And there's beauty to all of it. I mean, I love it all. I love that there's different expressions and cultural backgrounds and histories and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I really want, um, us to maybe walk away this year with a couple of things. I want us to be able to show up in church when we've had panic attacks on the way to church,
Mm-hmm.
and actually learn how to engage in a church environment with a new set of church leaders that honors your story, and that also keeps you connected to a community that God's desire for it was to be really good. I want people to be able to look at their stories and the places that have been silenced. I'm like, if anybody knew this part of my story, like I'd be kicked out. I'd be canceled. So they'd divorce me. I'd lose my job. I'd never preach again. Whatever your story is, like, I want us to be able to go, maybe I'm going to get brave and I'm going to reach out for some help. I had written, I'm just thinking about, I have 800 thoughts, but
Yeah.
I was talking to my friend Lauren earlier today, and we were like, you know what? I think for 2024, I want to focus on the hurting, the hesitant, and the hopeful. And so I think we all find ourselves in those pools, right? In different capacities.
Yeah.
And that it's okay. You might be in a season where you're like, nope, I cannot go to church. It is too traumatizing to me. It is too terrifying. Cannot do it. Love that. Then don't, right? Because Jesus is here. He's like, I will sit with you until you feel safe.
Yep.
If it is there is no way that I can try to risk my heart to fall in love again. Cannot do that right now. Okay. Don't. Right. Whatever your, I'll never do that thing is, that's okay. But that this really would have life change and that we would be able to get to know each other. Like, that's my hope, is that it's really lonely for me, to be honest. It's super lonely because I only get to see myself and the guest. And I'm so grateful for people that reach out to me. It's always so encouraging because there are a lot of days where I go, this is too hard. I want to quit. Too hard, too much. Can't do this. So lonely. I'm grateful that I do have support on the backside of this podcast, which is how this is happening. Would love to grow that team. Would love to grow that support this year. But to really believe that it's not like I might be the host of the podcast or today the guest of the podcast. But I'm not the one that's going to make this place good. Like, we all contribute to that. Or I should say I'm not going to be the one that does it by myself. Like, I can't.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited for what this year is going to hold, for the conversations we're going to have, for the friends we're going to have. Excited to connect with other, podcast communities, and for us to find ways to connect in person, to do some more like virtual type places where we can show up in the same room. My goal for 2024 is to take our virtual meetings. So that is one thing we have changed, is our virtual family meetings you need to be subscribed to the newsletter to be able to get that link. And so just that way it just kind of keeps like robots and stuff out of it.
Yeah.
Where we're just like, okay, hey, so if people want to go ahead and subscribe, that information will be in the show notes. And they also can find that information on my website, recoveryourlife.co, and our Instagram, Facebook page. You'll want to be subscribed to that to have more connection of what's happening on the podcast, what's happening with me, and then how do we connect as a community. That will be a big shift for this year.
Okay. Yay. Yes and amen. I love that. I love all the things. Bridgett, thank you so much for being open and honest and vulnerable and sharing, just some of your backstory. And I think people will be able to just know you a little bit better, understand you a little bit better, and just more willing to say, yes, I'm on this journey with her. So thank you so much for everything that you're doing with the podcast, with everything. I mean, I believe that this is beyond just a podcast. It really is going to be and growing into an awesome community. So thank you. Love you, girl. So appreciate you. And I know lots of viewers and listeners love you and appreciate you too.
Thanks, guys. Love you, Ashley.
Love you. Bye.